So I just got out of In a Violent Nature. First reactions for it, I don't know. I don't know if I like this movie or if I think this is just a bunch of gore porn. There are definitely cool effects in it, some pretty cool kills, but I don't feel there was very much substance to the story. I think I'm going to sleep on it and see how I feel in the morning.
I slept on it. Welcome back, everyone, to I'll Be Right Back, Horror with Nadia, and today I'm giving my review of In a Violent Nature. Before we get into it, please hit that like button, subscribe. I do movie reviews, breakdowns, plus weekly horror news segment every Tuesday. Now let's get into it. In a Violent Nature, directed by Chris Nash, known for ABC's Of Death 2 and 2016's The Boys, is an interesting take on the slasher genre, I will say. The story is Johnny, a vengeful spirit, spurred by a horrid, 60-year-old crime. Timeline's a little weird in this movie. Is awakened and sets havoc on a group of teens that have taken something from his burial site. So, typical kind of lore story. Very reminds me very much of Friday the 13th. Overall, this whole thing. The whole movie is set from the point of view of Johnny as he embarks on a very bloody rampage on these teenagers, plus a couple other victims. And it's described as an ambient slasher, which I think fits. While I was really excited to check out this movie, being raised on slasher movies from the 80s and 90s, when we could rent them as VHS, I know I'm aging myself for slumber parties. Overall, the story kind of fell a little flat for me. I understand I understood the undertones of nature and animal violence and comparison, but it that was dropped throughout the movie, especially towards the end when explained in a monologue, but it didn't work for me. You have no connection to any of the other characters. But granted, understandably, this is from the point of view of the killer. So as the audience watches Johnny stomp through the forest, which by the way is a lot, everything from sight to sound is seen objectively through Johnny, which is really cool. When we get into spoiler territory, which I will let everybody know, there's a really cool thing that they've done with sound in this. You do get a bit of his lore told through generational campfire stories of the killer, and you get pieces and little Easter eggs here and there of the tragic background and how he's coming back to avenge and take his anger out on basically every living person in his way, which he does. There's a lot of tropes in this movie of each of the teenager. I think we've got, from my notes, a stoner, we have a slut, we have a snob, we have a jerk. Obviously, we have the virginal, final girl, and the guy that tries to save him, all these things. Now, I do want to get into spoiler territory right now, but I will tell you that my rating towards the end, and I'll time mark this video for us. So let's get into spoiler territory. All right. Things I liked about the movie. The special effects is top tier. Top tier. The use of physical effects is fantastic in this. Reminds me of my old days. Loved it. Thought it was really cool. The second kill, which is the stoner, of course, has his head basically chopped off from here, about here. Yeah, through the mouth, out through the back. And then later on, his head and his body is used to break into a ranger station, which was really cool. There's my whole row in the movie theater laughed at this. So basically, his head through the glass, and then you in the ranger station is where this killer finally finds his mask. You've seen it in all the promos, and he uses the body, basically throws the body to the glass, and he's able to get his mask. Again, my whole row laughed at it. And there's a really cool light shot in this when he first throws the head through the windows and it lands, and perfect lighting through the window right on the head. It was great. I loved it. There's a lot of actually really great wide shots in this movie. There's the infamous yoga scene, which was a buzz, where the victim's head's literally pulled through her stomach out the back with hooks. So basically, if you like gore, this is definitely the movie for you. I think if you are a fan of the Terrifier films, this is probably your jam. I also liked a little bit of the story going on in the background. You get tips of it, like during the radio playing in the opening, knowing about traffic. So the main road, there's not going to be a lot of cars coming down of it. Using detours. You also get throughout the movie more lore into Johnny, and it changes ever so slightly to who's telling the story. The killer himself is an interesting character. I prefer it more when he didn't have his mask on in the beginning and you would just see the silhouette of his face in the darkness. I thought that was really cool. I really thought the mask kind of made him almost cartoonish a little bit. Also, there's a scene where you actually get to see his face, and I thought that kind of also let go of the magic of what the killer is or who he is. I can understand it playing into the story, but I thought he was more terrifying and a scarier figure when he one didn't have the mask on, and two, you didn't really get to see what his face looked like. You usually saw from the back of his head, his chest. You would see silhouettes of it. You could barely make it out, and I thought that was had more impact than the mask. I found it was just too much. Now, Johnny plays a mentally handicapped individual. So he was a mentally handicapped individual when he was alive. His tragic background story happened. But I felt the continuity didn't hold up. So while there's scenes of him and you could tell, there's a particular scene where, especially when the close up of his face, where he found a little car that's attached to the keys. So he sees it as a toy. But then there's a scene where he takes a log and he's able to put it in a car to have between the seat and the horn to have the horn go off to have these individuals, the rest of the victims, like come out of the cabin. I'm like, the continuity doesn't match here for me. It took me out of it. Uh, there was one particular cool scene that kind of played into it. Anybody who deals with individuals like this, I have a sister who's autistic, startling them, such like that, will end poorly. Like you don't want to scare individuals like that, depending on their mental capacity, depending on where they are on the spectrum, right? Well, there's a scene where, so stupid, one of the final victims who's trying to play the hero, he's like, okay, I'm going to distract him, telling the final girl, you run off. The way this guy distracts him is just by showing up right behind Johnny and then basically scares Johnny, who then takes out his fear and his rage onto this guy, like literally hatches him to death. And once he's dead, continuously hatches him. Like you just, it's a long time. You just hear that noise of the hatchet or the axe or whatever you want to call it, just slamming into this guy's head constantly. And I thought that was interesting because that, again, plays into having an autistic sister, that plays into some individuals that are like that. Sound was really cool for this movie. Uh, when you're in the beginning half of this movie, you're told from the point of view of Johnny, right? So you don't hear anything in the forest. It's barely. You mostly hear him stomping through the forest. There's not a lot of life. You don't really hear birds. You basically just hear from his point of view. I mean, the guy's dead. I doubt he has eardrums. I don't know. So it's dead silent. Now, switch that when you get to the final act, when the final girl is running through the forest, trying to run away from him. It's loud, unnerving. She's also got the trauma of hearing her friend getting his head smashed in with this hatchet. So I really love the use of sound in this. I wish there was more substance to the lore of Johnny, maybe a connection to the victims. But granted, again, it's told in a sense like in the day in the life of a serial killer. Sounds like an SNL skit. You get a monologue at the end that's comparing Johnny to a bear, or is the bear Johnny? Like it's very vague. I think it's basically saying that Johnny is a bear, comparing it to the violence of nature and unexpectedness that you experience out in nature. And the circle of life, whatever. Anyway, one thing I did not like is the constant POV of him walking. I get it, but it could have been cut down because there were times, and I could even tell by the person sitting next to me, we're both like, okay, guy, pick up your steps. Let's go. Let's get going. Now, this movie is 90 minutes. Pretty good for 90 minutes. Right in the time range that I enjoy. It felt just a little bit longer again with those POVs of him just constantly walking through the forest. All in all, I give this a 6 out of 10. Worth the watch, but not a repeat for me. So I want to thank you all for joining me, and I hope you all stay spooky.